All right, now we want to get you some analysis on the independent autopsy of Nolan Wells and where this case may head next. CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi joins us now in studio to discuss what we found out yesterday. Caroline, good morning. There was an independent autopsy the family of this 18-year-old had issued or conducted. They made sure that it happened. The results came out yesterday, but it's still inconclusive. What did you make of what it did and didn't say?
Yeah, so we still have an inconclusive cause of death and an inconclusive manner of death, which is frustrating, right? Because it seems like we have more questions than we have answers. Yeah. We do have potentially different questions, I think. Really important to note that, yes, this was an independent autopsy performed by a very well-respected forensic pathologist. However, it was the second autopsy performed on Nolan's body, right? So the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed expeditiously their autopsy. We just don't know the results of that yet because they're crossing all their T's, dotting all their I's, waiting for the toxicology report to come back. We just have the benefit of getting these results more quickly. I would like to just set expectations for that. A second autopsy, you're never going to get as much information from a second autopsy as you do from a first autopsy, right? There were inherent limitations here, not the least of which was body decomposition, right? So they noted that the body had been pretty severely decomposed by the time they were able to look at it, such that they couldn't find potential bruising on surface level areas. The first pathologist retained the neck structures of Nolan Wells' body, which is
why would that
So it's
be?
Not uncommon. So when you're looking at a potential drowning death, the neck is an important region of the body to see, including those pathways, whether there was water, things of that nature. So, I don't want I have to stress it's not atypical. Even the forensic pathologist that conducted this report noted that that is a typical course of action. But the fact is, when you don't have the full body, you cannot come up with a cause of death or a manner of death.
And you're focusing on something being typical procedure because there's so much attention on this incident. It's heartbreaking. And there's suspicion about if this young man was helped by his friends or if his so-called friends had something to do with his death. This independent autopsy could not rule out foul play. And I understand the results will eventually be handed to a grand jury. So what does this all really mean as far as getting to the truth?
Well, it certainly doesn't rule out foul play, but I think there are a subset of causes of death that we can rule out, right? There was no blunt force trauma to the head, for example, with lacerations, meaning, no gunshot wounds, no knife wounds, indicating perhaps a physical altercation prior to the entry of the water. That being said, there's no way to rule out other potential homicidal causes of death. Look, you have an inherent tension in these types of cases where you have the grieving parents here that lost a beautiful boy. They want answers and they want them now. But the integrity of an investigation really needs to, hinges on waiting until you have all of the information there in order to come out with answers. And I think that's what we're seeing here, this tension.
Yeah, a heartbroken community, but a general public transfixed.
7 people went out to the island that morning. 6 came back that evening. Nobody reported it. Not from the water, not from the boat launch, not on the drive home. The missing person call came hours later, from someone who had never been on that boat. Search crews worked the island for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, a federal park ranger found the body of an 18-year-old on the northwest tip. He was a college wide receiver. He was a strong swimmer. The sheriff's department reached a conclusion almost immediately. No foul play. An accident. His mother did not accept that. The family hired one of the most credentialed pathologists in the country to conduct a second autopsy. He could not determine a cause of death either, and here is why. The internal structures of the neck were missing from the body when it arrived. Those are the exact structures you examine to determine whether a person was strangled. Somebody had removed them before the second examination. No official has publicly explained the decision. There was also a red mark on the back of the head, 12 inches by 8. The pathologist could not say what caused it. Weeks later, an audio engineer in Texas pulled up a recording that had already been public for days. A distress call about a failed pump on a sinking boat. Everyone had heard it. Nobody had studied it. She spent 9 hours on the first 37 seconds, separating the channels and raising the background. She says the voices behind that call are not talking about the boat. She says one of them uses a name that had not appeared in any news report at that point. She says another asks a question about a person that makes no sense if that person is alive and standing on an island a mile behind them. If she is right, 6 people rode home knowing what happened to the 7th. This case involves the death of a teenager, an incomplete forensic examination, and federal charges against 2 people who sent bomb threats to a sitting judge and a sheriff's office. Nobody has been charged in connection with the death. Everyone named in this episode is presumed innocent, and we will be clear about what is proven and what is disputed. You are watching The Crime Executioner. If you are new, subscribe and turn on notifications. This case is still open. Nothing you are about to hear has been resolved. Let's get into it. The last thing Nolan Xavier Wells did for his parents was cook them dinner. It was July 3rd, 2026, an ordinary Friday evening in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He made the meal, he ate with them, and then he got ready to leave. He was staying at a friend's house that night because the group had an early start planned for the 4th. His mother, Christine Wansley, remembers him telling her he was heading out. She remembers that he said he loved her. She remembers a hug and a kiss at the door. That was the last confirmed contact between Nolan and his family. He was 18 years old. He played football. He was an athlete in the way that shapes a body and a schedule, and everyone who knew him described him the same way. When reporters started asking, he could swim, and he could swim well. That detail would matter enormously within 72 hours, but on July 30, it was just a fact about a kid who grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where the water is part of the geography of your childhood. The plan for the next day was Horn Island. Horn Island is not a beach you drive to. It sits roughly 12 miles off the Mississippi coast, a thin barrier island reachable only by boat. On the 4th of July, it fills up. Hundreds of people anchor off the sand and spend the day there. And Horn Island is federal property. It falls inside Gulf Island's National Seashore, administered by the National Park Service. Nobody thinks about that on a holiday weekend. It becomes one of the most important facts in this entire case. On the morning of July 4th, Nolan left with a group of friends aboard a 22-foot boat. The exact size of that group has been reported inconsistently, so here is what the record actually supports. A caller from that vessel would later tell a dispatcher there were about 7 people aboard. Separately, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has said investigators interviewed 3 of Nolan's friends in depth. Those are 2 different figures describing 2 different things, and they have been merged carelessly in a lot of coverage. We are going to keep them apart. They went out for the day. That was the whole plan. Ride out in the morning, spend the 4th on the sand, ride back before dark. Nobody left that dock intending for anyone to stay behind. The vessel was a 22-foot, 202-22 Triton TRX. A base boat, aluminum hull, open deck, built for lakes and inshore water rather than a 12-mile run across the Mississippi Sound. At some point in the middle of the afternoon on July 4th, something on that boat stopped working. The bilge pump is the system that clears water out of the hull. It is small, it is unglamorous, and when it fails on open water, the situation escalates quickly. Around 4 o'clock, near the western tip of Horn Island, the pump quit and the boat started taking on water. Someone aboard called Sea-Tow, a private marine assistance company operating out of Biloxi. Not the Coast Guard, not 911. A commercial towing service, the marine equivalent of roadside assistance, and the caller mentioned early that they had a membership. The recording of that call is now one of the most examined pieces of audio in the country, but the procedural content of it is straightforward. The caller reported the location as the west tip of Horn, said the bilge pump had failed, and said they were sinking. The dispatcher asked how far the water had come up. The caller struggled to quantify it and said only that they were going down. The signal was poor throughout. The dispatcher had to ask for information more than once. She asked whether the boat had a VHF marine radio aboard, which is the standard equipment for exactly this situation. The caller said no. He gave GPS coordinates. They placed the boat just off the northwest tip of the island. He asked for the vessel to be pumped out and towed to Fort Bayou Launch. Then the dispatcher asked a question that would be replayed millions of times. She asked how many living, breathing people were on the boat. The caller said about 7. Sea-Tow transferred him to a local captain. While that captain was on the line, he was told by Jerry Adkerson, the grandfather of the boat's operator, that assistance was no longer needed. If anything changed, he would call back. Nothing was ever towed. Sea-Tow never came. Roughly an hour before that call, according to his own public account, Warren Hudson spoke with Nolan. Hudson says Nolan told him he would get a ride home with another group. That is one version of the afternoon. Katie McCormack's sister, Gracie, has publicly disputed it. She says Nolan was ready to leave. The boat made it back. Whatever water it had taken on, whatever state the pump was in, the vessel returned to the mainland that afternoon carrying everyone who was still aboard. People stepped off onto the dock. People got into vehicles. People drove home. Nolan was not among them. Consider what that means in practical terms. Every person who came off that boat knew an 18-year-old had been left 12 miles offshore on a federal barrier island with no phone, no vehicle, and no confirmed ride. Some of them believed he had arranged transport with another group. Believing something and confirming it are different acts. Nobody called the Coast Guard. Nobody called the Sheriff's Department. Nobody called the National Park Service, which patrols that island. Nobody called his parents. The afternoon passed. The sun went down over the Sound. Boats that had anchored off Horn Island all day pulled anchor and headed in, and the sandbar emptied out the way it does every 4th of July. Christine Wansley found out her son was missing later that night. She did not hear it from an agency. She did not hear it from a search coordinator. She heard it from one of Nolan's friends. She reported it to authorities herself. By the time an official search could organize, the water was black and the window was gone. Crews worked the island and the surrounding water through July 5th. They worked it again on the morning of July 6th. That is when a National Park Service ranger, moving along the northwestern tip of the island, found him. He was in an area known locally for dangerous rip currents. He was wearing blue swim shorts. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department reached a position quickly. Investigators said they believed Nolan had likely drowned and that they had found no evidence of foul play. That assessment was made public before the state medical examiner had completed anything, and it has shaped every argument about this case since. Understand the position they were in. A young man goes to an island, does not come back, and is recovered 2 days later in water known for rip currents. On its face, that is a drowning. Departments make that call regularly, and they are usually right. But there was an object that had not been examined yet. Nolan's phone had not gone to the island with him. When his mother eventually had it in her hands, she said something about it concerned her. There were no saved Snapchat messages on it. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted its examination on July 7th, the day after the recovery. The family did not wait for those results. They did not believe they would get them, and they wanted their own. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, retained by Christine and Elmore Wansley, commissioned an independent examination. The pathologist was Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., president of the National Medical Association, and the former chief medical examiner for the District of Columbia. He conducted the second examination in Washington on July 10th. His preliminary report was completed on July 19th. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick paid for it. It is worth pausing on how unusual this arrangement was. Private autopsies happen. Private autopsies conducted before the state has released its own findings are far less common, and one senior medical examiner would later note publicly that the sequence itself complicates any comparison between the two reports. Mitchell's preliminary findings, stated in the terms he used. Cause of death, undetermined pending investigation. Manner of death, undetermined pending investigation. He found no skull fractures. He found no other major fractures. He found no deep tissue injuries that explained how Nolan had died. He did document one thing, a focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue at the lower back of the head, measuring 12 inches by 8. He performed a layered dissection to examine it. He could not attribute it to a cause. He described it as requiring further investigation. Two limitations shaped everything he wrote. The first is procedural. When the body reached him, the internal structures of the neck, including the trachea, were not present. They had been retained by the state examiner's office. Mitchell noted that retaining tissue for further testing is not in itself improper. He also noted he did not know the reason in this instance. The second is biological. By July 10th, decomposition had advanced to a degree that made it impossible to determine whether there had been bruising, abrasions, or surface injuries at all. His written conclusion was narrow and precise. He could not rule out that intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death. That is not a finding of foul play. It is a statement that the question could not be closed. If you want the whole picture on this case rather than one half of it, subscribe now. Because what you just heard is about to be contradicted. and we are going to give that contradiction the same room we gave this. Within days, two of the most experienced forensic voices in the United States looked at the same report and said the family's own pathologist had it wrong. Dr. Michael Baden has performed or supervised more than 20,000 autopsies. He was chief medical examiner of New York City. He has testified in most of the highest-profile forensic disputes of the last 50 years. He read the independent report and disagreed with the direction it pointed. In his assessment, the discoloration at the back of the head does not indicate foul play. He characterized the report as reaching for straws, and said the findings are consistent with what local law enforcement had described. The competing explanation is not exotic, it is basic physiology. When circulation stops, blood settles. It moves to whichever part of the body is lowest, and it pools there, staining the surrounding tissue a dark red. Pathologists see it in every case. A body lying on its back for an extended period, or positioned on an examination table for an extended period, will show that settling at the back of the head and shoulders. It looks alarming to anyone who has never seen it before. It is often nothing at all. That does not close the question. It means the same mark supports two readings, and the person interpreting it is doing the deciding. The dissent was not confined to medicine. Jennifer Coffindaffer spent her career as an FBI special agent. She reviewed what was publicly available on the investigation: surveillance footage, witness statements, Coast Guard communications, and the riptide conditions in the water off the northwestern tip of the island. Her conclusion was that the evidence points toward a tragic accident rather than a crime. She also offered the most useful observation anyone has made about the conflicting accounts of that afternoon. Both versions can be true. If one person spoke to Nolan at one moment and another person saw him at a different moment, the accounts diverge without anyone lying. In her assessment, it reads as a timing problem rather than a fabrication. Then there is the procedural objection, raised by Dr. Kendall Crowns, the medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas. Ordering a private autopsy before the state has completed its own is not the normal order of operations. It means the independent pathologist is working with an incomplete picture by design, and it makes any later comparison between the two reports harder to interpret cleanly. Now the counterweight, and it deserves the same weight. Retaining neck structures for additional testing is a legitimate practice. Pathologists do it when there are questions that require more time. Nobody credible has argued that the act itself was improper, but no official has publicly explained why it was done here. Not the state medical examiner, not the coroner, not the district attorney. The family asked, and the answer was silence. That silence is what they are reacting to, not the science. And there is one fact neither side disputes, and it is the strangest one in the entire case. Nobody can say what day Nolan Wells died. On July 26th, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources released the CETO recording to Locke's News. The station posted it. Millions of people listened to it as a curiosity, a piece of context, a document of a boat in trouble. For days, nobody took it apart. Janetta Brantley is an audio engineer based in Texas, 16 years in the field, a degree in music production from Full Sail University, followed by a master's in entertainment business. Her working life is post-production, sound design, dialogue cleaning, dialogue editing, isolating speech from noise, is the technical problem she solves professionally. She had been following the case. She woke before 6 one morning, played the recording, and thought she heard a name in the background chatter. She pulled the file into Logic Pro X. What she found was a dual mono recording, the standard format for phone systems that log calls. The caller and the dispatcher were already separated onto different channels. That meant she could mute the dispatcher entirely and work only with what was happening on the boat. From there, the process was conventional. Equalization, which means selecting specific frequency bands and either reducing what interferes or lifting what is buried. Then gain, which raises volume across a selected section. She looped the passages that stood out and worked them individually. 9 hours on 37 seconds of audio. She has been explicit that she refused to use AI restoration tools and named the ones she avoided. Her reasoning is technically sound. Generative restoration can invent sound that was never in the original file, which would make the result worthless as evidence. What she says she heard, and this is her interpretation rather than an established fact, is a name that had appeared in no published report at that time, a question about someone's physical condition, and a phrase about covering something up. The dispute began immediately. TMZ had produced its own enhancement separately. A forensic audio specialist examined that version and found it ran roughly 20 seconds longer than the original release and carried a different digital fingerprint. News Nation reported it could not verify the enhanced audio. Attorney Russell Latino represents Bart Edmiston Jr., one of the young men on the boat. Latino calls the enhanced recording doctored, and the transcript circulating alongside it fabricated. His central argument is worth taking seriously. Hand a listener a transcript first, and they will hear those exact words in audio that is otherwise unintelligible. He says his client cooperated with investigators from the beginning, and that his only role on the boat was helping drain water. Bart Edmiston Jr. has never been charged with anything. Within days, the audio was on national television, and the attention it generated brought something into this case that nobody had planned for. Ashley Cole sits on the Jackson County Chancery Court. She is a judge, and she is the stepmother of Warren Hudson. On July 11th, a Facebook account sent her a string of messages. Nearly a dozen of them arrived together. They told her a package would be delivered to her office and that opening it would start a countdown. They described what the explosion would do. They told her to ask God for forgiveness. She posted publicly about receiving them. Federal investigators traced the account. They followed an email address, a set of IP addresses, and a phone number to an address in Sacramento, California. Phone records showed that number had called office lines for the Jackson County Chancery Court in the early hours of July 11th. Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarce, 27, was arrested and charged with interstate transmission of a threatening communication. In the complaint and indictment, the judge is identified only by her initials. Conviction on that charge carries up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. He was not the only one. On July 23rd, between 1:34 and 1:42 in the afternoon, 21 calls were placed from a blocked number to the George County Chancery Clerk's office. The caller told staff not to go outside. Between 2:06 and 2:24, 8 more calls went to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, warning employees that there was a device outside and asking, on a callback, whether they were still in the building. Investigators obtained emergency records from phone carriers. Cell tower data showed the device associated with that number had settled overnight near known addresses in Cincinnati, Ohio. Michelle Francine Edwards, 52, was charged on July 30th in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Mississippi. The FBI is now investigating threats directed at both witnesses and officials connected to this case. None of these people were on that boat. None of them knew Nolan Wells. They watched a case online, reached a conclusion, and acted on it against a courthouse and a sheriff's office. The Hudson family has since offered a $50,000 reward for information about Nolan's death. They have also threatened legal action against content creators who continue to publish the claim that Nolan's friends were responsible for it. And in the middle of all of this, the state of Mississippi made a decision about what the public would be allowed to see. On July 23rd, Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath recorded a video statement and released it to the public. Her message was procedural. The autopsy report in this case would be withheld until a grand jury could review it. That was not a decision made for this case specifically. In Jackson County, she said, every death except those from natural causes and non-criminal traffic collisions is presented to a grand jury. She said her office had handled death investigations this way for her entire career and that most people simply did not know it. It was a reasonable explanation. It also meant that a family who had been asking questions for nearly 3 weeks would be told nothing further, and that the country watching would be told nothing at all. On July 31st, officials confirmed the state medical examiner had completed the report. It has not been released. Toxicology results have not been made public either. Everything now goes to a grand jury, which will determine whether any crime occurred. While that was being decided, Sheriff John Ledbetter laid out the scale of what his department had done. Investigators had interviewed approximately 60 witnesses. 3 of the friends who traveled with Nolan were interviewed in depth. The FBI was assisting with forensic examination of the digital evidence collected during the investigation. That federal involvement is not a sign of anything sinister, and the sheriff said so plainly. Horn Island is federal land. His department works with federal agents routinely. The case had also become national by then, and that changed the temperature of everything. Attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton held a press conference at National Action Network headquarters in New York on July 10th. 12 days later, the independent autopsy findings were announced from the stage of the 117th Nazi National Convention in Chicago. Nancy Grace devoted repeated episodes of her program to the case, questioning openly why an autopsy report was being kept from the public. The governor of Mississippi responded by publicly blaming Crump and Sharpton for stoking division in the state. The family's position has not moved through any of it. They have said, from the beginning, that they are asking for transparency rather than a conclusion, and that the answers they have received so far do not explain what happened. And underneath all of it, one thing has still never been accounted for: the hours between the boat coming in and a mother finding out from a friend that her son was gone. Nobody has explained them, and the only body that will ever see the complete record meets entirely in secret. This is the state of the case as of early August 2026. The state autopsy is complete and sealed. Toxicology results have not been made public. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan's death. The grand jury review is pending. 2 federal prosecutions over threats are active, one in California and one in Ohio. The FBI continues to assist with digital evidence and is separately investigating threats made against witnesses and officials. Here is what the evidence actually supports right now, stated without spin in either direction. Investigators have said consistently that they believe this was an accidental drowning, and they have said repeatedly that they found no evidence of foul play. They have not changed that position at any point in a month of national scrutiny. The independent pathologist retained by the family could not confirm that and could not exclude the alternative. His report closed neither door. It documented a mark he could not explain and limitations that prevented him from going further. The audio at the center of the public debate is disputed by credentialed people on both sides. One engineer with 16 years of professional experience stands behind her work. Attorneys and forensic specialists say the enhanced versions circulating cannot be verified. Both of those things are currently true at the same time. Anyone with information about what happened on Horn Island on July 4 can contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Department at 228-769-3063. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He cooked dinner for his parents on a Friday night, told his mother he loved her, and went to stay at a friend's house. The boat came in without him, and his mother found out from a friend, at night, hours later. Every other question in this case is contested. That one is not, and no version of this story, from any side, has explained it yet. This case goes to a grand jury. When it does, we will cover it here, in full, the same way we covered this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. This is the Crime Executioner.